Hey everybody, it's Ian York, finally, and I wanted to make a video on a topic that I feel nobody understands. Whether it be bread tubers, diehard anarchists, market socialists, or social democrats, it seems like no one knows what the fuck a revolution is. Except Zoe Baker, she's the queen, we stand. But from how people talk about it, you would think a revolution is just a big war where everything works out okay. It's not hard to understand why people think this. I live in a country born from a revolutionary insurrection, a revolutionary war, you could say. Also, violence does seem to follow a lot of so-called revolutions, even if it's more limited in some places than in others. And so a lot of people just view revolution as a violent insurrection meant to bring about your desired system in flash. And even when people have a more nuanced view of revolution, they again just mistake it for a big war that destroys the old government. So I wanted to make a not so long video explaining what is a revolution and how it differs from just a simple rebellion or insurrection. As I've hopefully already made great pains to point out, despite popular misconception, a revolution is not just a buzzword to describe a big war that overthrows a government. It's much more than that, and I think we as lefties need to stop throwing it around as a solution to any problem of tactics or organization. Revolution should be a complete reimagining and recreation of the productive and political forces in society to ones based on social justice and functional liberty. Now, social justice is another one of those buzzwords that have been used and abused in the last few years by everyone all over the political spectrum. But to put it simply, social justice is just the shifting of relations between society and individuals to ensure rights and opportunities to those individuals. Technically, it can be a neutral term, but most people on the left, including me, use it to mean ensuring the rights and freedoms of underprivileged people so that they may improve their state of being to the best of their abilities. Or to use another overused phrase, to ensure the greatest equality of opportunity in society. And this goes into functional liberty or positive liberty. A good way to think about positive liberty is to think of negative liberty. Imagine you've just been transported to 1700s France and managed to have a conversation with the Lord. Let's say his name is Lord Dartbutt. And with the classical French we all obviously have training in, you tell Lord Dartbutt, how can you participate in this institution of feudalism? It's immoral and leads to the misery and trampling of freedom of thousands of peasants living in France. You should support the king abolishing feudalism. And Lord Dartbutt would respond, ha! You talk about the freedom and well-being of peasants, but what of the freedom and well-being of I and my fellow lords? You would have the king trample on my rights and well-being as a lord because you care more about the peasants than I? Woof! And then you would be taken out back and beat on or something, I don't know. But the point is, Lord Dartbutt is technically correct by the king expropriating his land, freeing the peasantry, and ending feudalism. His right to be a feudal lord is being trampled on. In the process of that, however, millions of peasants living under the boot of lords will have a material improvement in their conditions and an increased freedom to better their lives. In the same way, if a bunch of workers came together to collectively bargain to turn their firm into a cooperative, those workers are technically violating the rights of that owner, but in doing so, they're expanding the rights and freedoms and paving the way for expanding the freedoms and material conditions of hundreds of millions of other workers. Lord Dartbutt's right as a lord over his serfs is an example of negative liberty. He is free from the king's coercion and trampling of his rights, but that freedom is at the expense of hundreds or thousands of peasants under him. This is the kind of liberty right libertarians, or proprietarians as Bookchin called them, believe in. They and some strains of liberalism believe in this conception of rights and freedoms outside the material reality and existing only as an abstract principle that we must all deontologically adhere to. We here at the And York channel are anarchists, actual anarchists, and anarchism is and always must be a materialist ideology. An ideology based in materialism doesn't care for negative liberty. All meaningful liberty must be positive. Positive liberty is the liberation of those peasants from the yoke of feudalism and allowing them to express themselves and live with the relatively greater freedom of movement, physically, economically, socially, and politically of a liberal democracy. And the transition, the revolution, from a capitalist democracy to a socialist free association is the next step to the continuation of positive liberty. And that to me is what revolution is. It's a complete change in our modes of economic, social, and political organization to ameliorate the injustices in the current hierarchies of dominance. This is why I don't like when lefties talk about revolution as though it's antonymous to reform, because reform is a part of revolution. Some parts of revolution would require reform and concessions from the ruling class, acquired through mass action by the workers, and some parts of revolution will involve open conflict and insurrection. This is what I feel is lost in the conversation between reformists and insurrectionary leftists. This idea that you have to pick one or the other when you don't. Violence and pacifism are both tools. They're both means to an end, and they both need to be used with discretion. There are times when nonviolent mass action, such as strikes, picket lines, and civil disobedience is the best option, and there are times when violence, such as sabotage, destruction of property, and self-defense is necessary. Both of these approaches are tools in a toolbox that have their use depending on the situation, and I don't think we should abandon either for the sake of our ideological cliques. Reform is important, and the willingness to engage in self-defense is also important and necessary. And revolution isn't an immediate process, it's a slow and methodical process where we change the social, political, and economic order of society. It's as Kropotkin said.
A revolution is not a mere change of government, because a government, however powerful, cannot overthrow institutions by mere decrees. Its decrees would remain dead letters if in each part of the territory a demolition of decaying institutions were not going spontaneously. Again, it is not the work of one day. It means a whole period, mostly lasting for several years, during which the country is in a state of effervescence, when the thousands of formerly indifferent spectators take a lively part in public affairs, when the public mind, throwing off the binds that restrained it, freely discusses, criticizes, and repudiates the institutions which are a hindrance to free development, when it boldly enters upon problems which seemed formerly insoluble.
And as anarchists, we don't just worry about hierarchy from one part of society, we worry about all hierarchies of domination. The domination by social classes is exacerbated by economic and political domination, and what distinguishes anarchists from other forms of leftist organization is that we worry not just about economic or social hierarchies. We know that you can't abolish the centralized system of capitalism and move to a socialist mode of production without also moving away from the centralized social systems of racism, as well as moving towards a more decentralized political democracy. We cannot destroy hierarchies of power in only one sphere of life. We must take an intersectional approach and destroy dominance hierarchies in every single form of human organization we can. Or as Murray Bookchin said,
Anarchism posed a question, not simply of a struggle between classes based upon exploitation. Anarchism really was posing a much broader historical question that even goes beyond our industrial civilization. Not just classes, but hierarchy. Hierarchy as it exists in the family. Hierarchy as it exists in school. Hierarchy as it exists in sexual relationships. Hierarchy as it exists between ethnic groups. Not only class divisions based upon economic exploitation. It was concerned not only with economic exploitation, it was concerned with domination. Domination which may not even have any economic meaning
at all. The domination of women by men in which women are not economically exploited. The domination of ordinary people by bureaucrats in which you may even have a welfare, so-called socialist type of state. Domination as it exists today in China, even when you're supposed to have a classless society. Domination even as it exists in Russia, where you are supposed to have a classless society. You see, so these are the things that I noted in anarchism, and increasingly I came to the conclusion that if we were to avoid, or if we are to avoid, the mistakes that were made over 100 years of proletarian socialism, if we are to really achieve a liberatory movement, not simply in terms of economic questions, but in terms of every aspect of life, we would have to turn to anarchism, because it alone posed the problem not merely of class domination, but hierarchical domination. And it alone posed the question not simply of economic exploitation, but exploitation in every sphere of life.
So when you talk about revolution, please don't just talk about it like it's a big spectacle in an EA game or something. We need to talk about revolution from a holistic view, not just as insurrection, but as a slow and steady uprooting of all the institutions that govern our daily life, and the creation of new forms of human organization based on freedom, true material freedom, radical democracy, and mutual aid. And as anarchists, we must do it through workers' mass action, communal solidarity, class solidarity, feminism, and through decentralized organization. And we shouldn't just talk about it like all we have to do is pick up an AK and a Molotov, because what we want should be so much more than that. We should be working to create, as the IWW said, a new society within the shell of the old.
Contra el enemigo nos manda el deber, el bien más preciado.